What's up, guys? Today I'm in Scotland. I was in Glasgow last week. This week it's Aberdeen. I'm talking to BP, the energy company, the oil company, about Formula One and how Formula One operates these high-performing teams. It's the sort of subject I talk to lots of people about, but with BP, an energy company where it's all about environmentalism, it's all about becoming sustainable as an organisation, going up against some serious challenges when the rest of the world think the oil companies are the enemy. They've got a tough task on their hands. They're looking to Formula One for perhaps some kind of solutions. Anyway, that's what I'm here today. But today I'm also going to be answering your questions, and we're going to be talking about things like the next Ferrari drivers, brothers driving together in Formula One. We're going to be talking about things like some of the technical details on the bottom of the car, the plank that runs right along the very bottom, the costs of running a Formula One team, and loads more. Stick with me. Welcome to another Ask Elvis. Beautiful scenery, isn't it? I'm going to start with this question, which literally by utter coincidence has just popped in the last 5 minutes. In fact, in the last minute. It comes from Harsha, and he says, "Hi Mark, I'm wondering why Shell and Mobil, etc. are among the sponsors for a few Formula E teams, the racing series, and their core business is the opposite of that." Well, that's a really good point and very topical given what I just opened this video with, because that's exactly why they're involved, because their original core business is all about oil production, isn't it? But what's at the heart of all of that is that they're an energy company. They're about energy production. So by getting involved with something like Formula E, first of all, it gives them a number of green credentials to be associated with the series, and that's why lots of sponsors are piling into Formula E. But also, it gives them a platform to start using some of that technology and that know-how that's within that sport, the other sponsors, the other partners, the other stakeholders of the sport, all about sustainable energy production. Big companies like BP, like Shell, like ExxonMobil are having to change their business models to recognise the changing environment around them. They are having to become sustainable energy production companies. They're moving into things like solar and wind electricity generation. Loads of things like that. So that is exactly why they're piling into Formula E. It's also why, as Formula One begins to change to a more sustainable business model, more and more of these companies will see more benefit in staying in the bigger sports that traditionally might have gone right against their core values. A pretty fancy place this, isn't it? The next question comes from a guy called Ben on Twitter, and he says, "Hi Mark, what is that puff of flame that comes out of the wheel when a tyre grazes a barrier? I've been watching F1 for several years now and none of the commentators have explained it." Okay, well, it's actually really simple. It's not the tyre, but it's the rim. The rim is generally made of magnesium. As magnesium, you remember the science experiments from school when you burnt magnesium? Very, very high energy flame that comes out of that. So when you get massive friction, high energy impact from a magnesium wheel rim against a barrier, concrete wall or something like that, you get this really bright flash of flame, and that's what it is. It's the magnesium combusting rather than anything to do with the tyre itself. Right, the next question is going to come from a guy called At Any Rate. I think this one was from on YouTube. Thanks for the question. He says, with the budget cap coming in, and that's for 2021 of course, and the big teams will undoubtedly be scaling back their operations, which departments do you think will take the biggest hit? And which staff do you expect will be unlucky and end up losing their jobs? Will they be moved to other departments in the company at Mercedes, for example? Well, that's a good point. And because we've got this big change coming for 2021, let's just quickly talk about what that is. Everybody has now agreed to a budget cap for 2021. It's centred around this figure of 175 million, but there are a number of things that doesn't necessarily include things like driver salaries and the most highest paid members of the organisation, other things, marketing costs, other things like that. But The point is there's a budget cap, which at the moment there isn't. And that means the bigger teams right now have no limit. They can spend whatever they want or whatever they need. When I was working at McLaren in the tobacco-sponsored era, we had almost endless budgets. If we ran out of our budget halfway through a season and we were in a championship fight, we just go back to our tobacco sponsor and say, look, we need more money because we're in this fight here. We could win the championship. It's going to cost us another 100 million. And we'd get it. You know, that's how it used to operate. Today, people like Mercedes, people like Ferrari, it's not quite, the money's not as free-flowing as that, but they have the opportunity that if they need more money to get them across the line, they could go to their boards or to some of their sponsors and say, look, give us a bit more. We think we can deliver the title if you can, you know, stump up the cash. So anyway, we're not going to have that from 2021 onwards. We're going to have a cap, a number where nobody's allowed to exceed. The problem with all of this is that it doesn't kick in until January of 2021, which means that lots of the teams are now going to be investing heavily throughout the course of 2020 to be able to get an infrastructure in place, some big pieces of equipment, things like wind tunnel. McLaren are buying a wind tunnel or building a wind tunnel deliberately before that budget cap comes in. Others will invest in very, very complex simulation tools, advanced simulation tools, advanced computer hardware to be able to run some of these great big operations that they'll be hoping to do from 2021 onwards, when they won't be able to invest in those, you know, those hard pieces of technology from that point onwards. So in answer to your question, who's it going to hit most? It's going to hit the departments that can have some of those roles replaced through technology. Because if they can invest in technology like things like AI to do some of the work that perhaps the drawing office does right now. Some teams already using AI to weed through the ideas that might come through the drawing office that maybe don't have the potential to go anywhere. AI will very quickly, for example, be able to tell you which ideas are worth pursuing further. And at the moment, lots of teams do that through humans. They, you know, experienced humans sitting in the drawing office pursuing ideas. So that's the first thing. Simulation tooling is clearly already having a big impact on Formula One, but will also be one of those things where we can cut down potentially on personnel because the simulation software will be able to do a lot more quickly. And it's things like that that's going to hit the human side of Formula One. When we had this last time around, I think from memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, 2009, when they banned testing, and every team at that stage had a test team, a separate test team pretty much. What happened in that situation is, first of all, lots of people lost their jobs from the test teams because they were no longer required. At the bigger teams, to answer the second part of your question, like Mercedes, like us at McLaren back then, we actually swallowed up a lot of that excess personnel into other departments. And it was things like the demo departments, the team of people that come together to operate the cars for demonstration runs, which are few and far between these days. It'll be those departments that I would imagine might get scaled back because they're the sort of thing that you don't need very often. When you do need them, potentially you can drag people off other things to make it work. So it's a really complex scenario. There will be job losses. It's going to be inevitable. And as I say, I think it's going to be the areas where either technology can be advanced and invested in now, which potentially could replace some of those jobs, or some of the jobs that are actually, I mean, I wouldn't say they're a luxury, but certainly some of the things that are on the sort of the marketing side of Formula One rather than the hardcore racing side, if you like. Those are going to be the more susceptible jobs to things like these big cuts. So it's going to be a difficult time for some of the bigger teams. Of course, at the smaller end of the scale of the Formula One grid, we won't have that situation necessarily because not everyone's spending anywhere near that $175 million cap. There you go. Right, quickly before I walk over to the conference centre across the road, Oscar de Miranda says, why is there a minimum weight for F1 cars? Shouldn't we have a minimum weight for drivers and then safety requirements based on stiffness while allowing teams to develop materials and cars that are as light and fast as possible? Okay, so I think lots of people might have a similar question to that. I think we all would love to see cars that are incredibly fast and lightweight, and I think the idea of developing lightweight materials absolutely has a place in Formula One, but it already does happen. There is a lot of research and development that goes into lightweight materials. Less so than used to be the case because the regulations have become more restrictive. Why do we have a minimum weight? Well, if we allowed teams to go as light as they possibly could, you start potentially compromising safety in that. You have to have a balance where everybody has to create a car to a minimum weight, because then you know that people are not trying to offset safety requirements in pursuit of a minimum weight. A little bit like with the drivers, where we've just we've just realised that drivers were kind of offsetting some of their own personal health to be able to achieve a weight that might give them some performance. We've accepted that that's no longer the right way to go about things, and we've changed the regulations around driver weight in a car. When you say here, shouldn't we just have a minimum weight for the driver and then a regulation based on the stiffness of the car? Well, that's not an easy thing to police, certainly not on a race weekend. Don't forget, on a race weekend, you can random check any car. You can very easily pop it onto a set of scales, know what it weighs. It's a black and white line. If it's above the minimum weight limit, it's fine. If it's below, it's illegal. You try doing that on a random basis over a race weekend in terms of the stiffness of the chassis or the safety capacity of that chassis. They're not as easy things to measure out in the field. So actually, from a regulation point of view, from a kind of policing the whole situation, a minimum weight is a nice, easy figure to be able to police and keep the teams honest, I guess, in that sense. So yeah, I get it. I get what you're saying there, but I think we have to find some kind of balance. I'd like to see material science being opened up a little bit more so we can start developing some of these new age materials, these graphene or these nano-based materials that could really start pushing performance and be of benefit to the wider world, where Formula One can be a real test bed for some of these incredible materials. I'd love to see more of that happening, because I feel like it's drifted away a little bit as the regulations have tightened up around the teams. But I still think we need to have a weight limit, a minimum weight limit, because, as I said, it's a very easy thing to keep check on, and it just keeps the teams from pushing the boundaries just too far that it then starts to compromise safety. Okay, so the talk is done. That all went well. I'm now back in the room. It's 8:30, which means I've got half an hour until Wheeler Dealer's Dream Car starts on the TV. So I'm going to watch that. I've ordered room service, and then I've got to go to bed, because tomorrow morning at 4 a.m. I've got an alarm call and a taxi coming to take me back to the airport. I fly back to London. I have a very short layover in London, where I then fly from London straight to Madrid. I then get off that plane, get onto another plane after a short layover, and go from Madrid to Marrakesh in Morocco, whereas at some point tomorrow night I will arrive there for another talk on Wednesday, before then flying home again on Thursday. So crazy couple of days, a lot of travelling, very early start, which means I'm going to smash through the last couple of questions, try and get this video uploaded before I go to bed. Right, let's get on with it then. This one comes from Amarok the Kitsune. He says, Elvis, to the best of your knowledge, what is the bare minimum cost, not including cars and drivers, to race in Formula One in today's money? Right, first of all, I don't quite get how can you race in Formula One without cars and drivers, so I'm not quite sure. But we are in luck, because thanks to Forbes, all of this information is available. Now, they have laid out bare all of the accounts from Toro Rosso. This actually comes from 2018, but I think it's all relevant. So let's have a look. Right, let's start by looking at what a Formula One team brings in, so what their revenue is. Now, Toro Rosso, by far, most of their revenue, of course, comes from Red Bull. Their main sponsor, $82.9 million is what Red Bull put into the Toro Rosso organisation through sponsorship in that year. It actually comes from the 2017 season, these figures, but this is what's available. So $82.9 million straight off the bat into the Toro Rosso organisation. Now, they say that through sales and services, and that means basically sponsorship, and any other services they sell, 30.3 million. That's a lot of money, so they've got a few sponsors kicking about. Casio's one of them, isn't it? Bringing in us a reasonable chunk of money to top up that budget. So that's added to the 82.9 million that Red Bull bring in. Then we've got prize money from Formula One, plus R&D grants that are available. That adds up to 59.7 million. So they had a decent year the year that these accounts are available for, when I think the cars finished 6th and 7th, that translated to almost $60 million from Formula One in prize money. There's a little bit of that is grants and subsidies, but the bulk of that is F1 prize money. And then they have this figure, 10.7 million, which they say comes from the increase in value of products that are under development. Now, I'm not entirely sure what that means, but that means that if they've got some kind of product that they've developed, product or service that they've developed in-house, that they've put some money into, that it's then increased in value. That's what they say that particular increase in value is, 10 million. There you go. So that is the total of what they bring into the organisation. $183.6 million. That's a lot of money. Right, let's look at what they've spent. Let's look at what their outgoings are. Now, they say that machinery and track equipment. Now, that is everything that they take to the racetrack. That is things like the garage setup. That's all the equipment they use at the garage, the equipment, the machinery that they use to take things to the racetrack and to assemble things. All of the track equipment, $5.7 million. They say they have spent just under $1 million on new software. Now, the software in a Formula One team is actually, it's not just new Windows program for your laptops. This is about software like CFD software, some of the simulation software that can be quite expensive to buy in and develop. Materials to build the cars. Now, this is a big one. This is all of the carbon fibre, all of the steel, all of the raw materials that they then create a Formula One car from. Plus, it includes things like team clothing, stickers, those kind of things. $56.5 million. That is a big expense. Now, this one, no surprise that that's a big expense. Travel, facilities costs, driver fees, $45.6 million. That's also a big chunk of anybody's budget. Engines, property, rental cars, etc. So that is the factories. Of course, don't forget Toro Rosso splits between Italy and the UK. Their engines, though, the estimate is that their engines from Honda cost about $17 million. Plus, of course, everything else, as it says there, rental cars, all of those associated expenses with going to the racetrack. Right, staff, 40 million. That's also a massive cost. A lot of people working for a Formula One team, although Toro Rosso is definitely not one of the biggest teams, of course. F1 entry fee, plus fines and sanctions and anything like that, $1.4 million. And just casually, other expenses, casual other expenses of $8.5 million. Now, that all adds up to a total of $181.1 million. Now, the difference between what it costs them to run the team, 181.1, and what they've brought in through sponsorship and any other means is 183.6. The difference is 2.5 million. Their profit over the year, over that particular year, 2.5 million. Now, some of you might be surprised that they've made a profit. I'm a little bit surprised that they've made a profit. Not all Formula One teams make profit. Certainly not historically if you go back through the years. 2.5 million. Okay, I mean, it's not bad, is it? It's not bad. It could be a lot more, but that's not too bad. But let's look at what's involved in that. To get to just 2.5 million, you have to go through revenues like this. You have to spend $181 million to get $2.5 million in profit. So to answer your question, and yes, you can take out the various ones if you like, the material. When you said minus cars, minus driver fees, it's an impossible question to answer. Driver fees are included in this 45 million here, but the materials to build the cars are included in that. So what about the development of the cars? What about the staff that it takes to build the cars? You can't remove the cars from the budget. But either way, you can see that around $180 million is roughly what it costs to run a Formula One team. Now, this is a back-of-the-grid Formula One team, isn't it? You can probably imagine Williams spend a little bit less than that, but if you're thinking about the guys at the front, you're talking double that, easily. Well over double that, in fact, for the likes of Mercedes and Ferrari. So There's a huge spread in Formula One, and I guess that's one of the things that 2021 and the cost cap is designed to try and address, to try and bring them all back closer together, to try and rein in the big spenders and allow the smaller teams to be a little bit closer to that. But I don't know, does that surprise you? $180 million is let's say, a sort of lower than average Formula One team's running costs for the year. Let me know what you think. By the way, I don't know how good that overhead shot will be because it's from a GoPro that's quite high up, but just look at the lengths I've had to go to get that top-down shot, given that I'm in a hotel room in Aberdeen. I have got a GoPro attached to the ironing board up there on a absolute makeshift on a makeshift mount. The ironing board is now perched on the desk and resting on the top of that chair. That's the lengths that I'm prepared to go to to get you the shots that we need.
He's called Harlan. He's a mature student. He's gone back into higher education. Every single penny he'd saved for his dream car, a Nissan Skyline, he's gone and invested that money in himself.
Tell me there's a massive bundle of cash that comes along with this.
There is some cash to come with it. I've got £200. My goodness. There's enough to change the steering wheel. And
right, this is not going that well because it's midnight now on Monday night. You're obviously not going to see this on Monday. You're not going to see this until at some point on Tuesday. I've got to get up in 3.5 hours from now, but I haven't finished the video, and I think, you know, got to this point, I might as well finish it. So let's smash through another couple of questions. I got another one from the same guy, Amarok the Kitsune. I've included it because I think it's a good question, an interesting one. He says, Elvis, does the floor of an F1 car have to be a specific kind of wood, or does it just have to be wood? Well, the truth is, it's not wood. It doesn't have to be wood. And actually, the regulations only state that it has to be a homogeneous material, and it specifies the density of that material. It's between 1.3 and 1.45, I think. And because it has such a specific density range, there's pretty much only one material that falls within that. And it's a resin-based material called permaglass, which is pretty much what everybody uses. Supplied by a company called BTR, and I think they supply, if not almost all the grid, maybe even all of the grid. So a resin-based material is what it now is. It did used to be wood, of course, but no longer. Hugo Carvalero says, being a racing mechanic all your life and in various forms of motorsport and eventually in F1, didn't you ever feel the urge to go out for a spin in the cars? In F1, are there any other people within the team that are allowed to drive the cars, or is it just a privilege reserved exclusively for the drivers? Love your expert insights. Thanks very much. I mean, for the first part of that question, obviously I had an urge to drive the cars. I mean, I would have loved to get behind the wheel of a Formula One car and take it out on the racetrack. The truth is I never did. I'm gutted about that, really, really devastated. But the reality is that it is just the drivers that ever get the opportunity. On very rare occasions, there are opportunities where, you know, I've seen members of the media be allowed to take out a car that's a few years old. So that has happened. But it's very, very rare. So almost in all circumstances, it's only ever a racing driver that gets behind the wheel of a Formula One car on a racetrack. But yeah, I would have loved to so much. I drove the simulator at McLaren, which was an amazing experience in itself. I mean, obviously sat in the cars loads, but just never got to take it out on the track. I mean, I've sat in the garage with the car, sat on its wheels, kind of ready to go, in the driver's seat, steering wheel on. I wish I could have clunked it into gear and just gone for it. But, you know, might have been the last thing I ever did in Formula One. Joseph Waldner says, does the safety car have a delta to drive to, or can the driver control the pace from what he thinks is best? That's a fair question. There is no set delta for the safety car to drive to. It's actually always judged on the situation. I mean, obviously the conditions, whether it's wet or dry, but also normally if the safety car's out, it's because there's been some kind of incident around the circuit, and that can range from all sorts of different things. So the safety car driver, in conjunction with race control, determine the pace, determine how fast they go at different parts of the lap. So it's very much down to each individual situation and is judged by the driver of the safety car. In reality, most of the time he's going almost as fast as he can, because if he doesn't do that, the Formula 1 cars are going so slowly they lose all temperature in brakes and tyres, and that can potentially end up being a dangerous situation. So the reality is he's almost always on his limit, but he has the ability to judge that together with race control to make sure that it's safe. Matthew Butcher says, with Leclerc's brother signing for Ferrari's academy, could we see a brother-teammate combo in the future? And has there ever been one in the past? Well, really interesting, isn't it? Could we see both Leclerc brothers at some stage racing for Ferrari? Maybe, absolutely maybe, because the younger brother is on his way up and not that far away. You know, once you're in the Ferrari academy, you are on a pretty decent ladder towards the top. Charles Leclerc has a long spell, in theory, left in Formula 1. There's no reason why they couldn't converge at the same time and potentially drive for the same team. Who knows? That would be great. Has it ever happened in the past? I don't think so. I just had a very quick Google, and the closest I could find was the Fittipaldis, who both drove in Formula 1 for their own race team in Formula 1, but I think I'm right in saying, and I'm sure somebody will be able to tell me, that they drove for that team a year apart. One in 75 and one in 76, I think. But somebody I'm sure will tell me. So I don't think it's ever happened for the same team before. Maybe the Leclercs could be the first. Okay, final question then, and this is a good one because I'm actually going to throw this back at you. I'll tell you my answer, but I'm going to throw it back at you as well. And it comes from Bram TSHE. He says, "Hi Elvis, question for your next Ask Elvis. If you were to be selected for the new Wheeler Dealers show, what would be your dream car?" Really enjoy the videos. Keep up the informative content. Thanks, man. Very much appreciated. My dream car, because lots of people have asked me this, especially since this series has come out. My dream car probably would be an early Porsche 911. I love the classic old school 911 look. I just think the styling is great. It's got so much history behind it. It's just an evocative car, and I love that. So that would be my dream car. What about you? I'm hoping I'm now going to get a list of dream cars in the comments of this video. So hit me up with a comment. I'd love to know what you think, what your dream car would be if you could pick anything. If you could get yourself onto Wheeler Dealer's dream car and we could sort one out for you, what would it be? Right, that's it folks. I am going to, well, I'm probably not going to go to bed, is the truth, because I've got to now finish the editing of this, start the uploading process, which can hopefully happen maybe whilst I get half an hour or an hour's sleep. It's now 1 o'clock. Thank you so much for all the questions. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back very soon, as long as I survive the rest of this trip. See you later folks. Ta-ra.